Hey, welcome, Doooovid here. We are live at Church of Entropy. Jean-Francois Gariepy of the Revolutionary Phenotype should be joining us soon, and I hope to ask him some pertinent questions about the coronavirus, and at the same time, pardon me, just a cough from my medication, not coronavirus, and review this book, The Revolutionary Phenotype, which is an interesting theory about biology and evolution that I've discussed on Week in Review of Church of Entropy. But let's right away just look at these new numbers, the updates. Me and Jennifer have done 2 streams since the shutdown started, so pretty intense stuff happening. We'll see people come in and see how many people tune in if JF shares it. We'll see if any of his audience follows him here. But let's look at these numbers. Am my screen share working?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, so here, is in Michigan, and for we'll look at the major index. This one, I put this in the chat. I'll put these in again for people who want to follow it using these links. So this one is the 17-year-old Jewish kid from Seattle who just programmed this to mine data from official sites. And now you could click on ones that you want to follow. So you can see the U.S., China, Italy is rapidly approaching China, is past China in deaths. United States is right behind Italy, although the deaths is lagging behind, God forbid. As we mentioned, the experts say that usually the cases of death lag behind about 3 weeks behind infection. You can see Spain. God forbid these numbers are increasing exponentially. Some of the states, New York, I have a specific map for New York. We'll look at the counties, and some of it will be relation. I want to ask JF about these things that Dr. Falke is talking about, regional shutdowns. So you can see Michigan is up there, 5th most infected state, God forbid, and it's getting worse. The hospitals are already near overflooded here. It's all in the news. So, it's unfortunate. Here's your Michigan cases by county. So Wayne County, where Detroit is, almost 1,000 cases probably now by the time they update it. Oakland County, where I am, about half of the cases, and like 75% of the cases in Wayne County are in Detroit proper. So you're seeing the big urban centers rapidly becoming the epidemic. And then you see half of the counties in Michigan don't appear to have it yet, and they might not get it. We're going to talk about the population sparsity. That's one of the reasons I wanted to bring on an expert. You could see that the number of cases spread out around the county is much less. And I'll leave this up. Maybe Jeff I'll show these to him. Here's New York. So you could see New York City proper. They're estimating at 15,000, probably higher. Suffolk County, where I went to Stony Brook, is all the way out there. Quite a bit close to New York, 2,000. Westchester, where the original outbreak happened with that lawyer who we don't know how he got it. Then there's Rockland County, and there also has got quite a few. But then you see the rest of New York, not that many cases. So it's related to population density very clearly. So I want to get that out there right away. We'll see. Maybe I'll show this calculator to JF and see if he has insight exactly on the coronavirus, and these are largely unknowns like transmission time, duration, these various things. Like it's unclear yet. So I've been following JF's show when he's been reviewing the scientific literature. Here's the New York Times. Let's see when this updated last. So it hasn't updated since noon, but these numbers, and you see like the bars of China. So the U.S. we're like a week behind Italy, and they're saying China went through like a 3-4 week period like now. So that's what it's going to get worse before it gets better unless some miracle happens. So pretty crazy. I'm not sure how the markets are doing now. I show these statistics. Maybe I've been showing this for a while, but look here, 40,000 infections the last few days. Numbers just jumping, and like I showed this curve, and it just it's double what it was, the last time, we showed it almost, and you could see the huge numbers. We're Saturday night, we were looking at 20,000 infections, and we say it's doubling every 2 to 3 days. So, God forbid it doubled 2 to 3 days later, and we're at 40,000 infections a day. So,
Yeah, you asked about the markets. Dow Jones is up 200 points from his yesterday close. And last I checked, Trump had some type of stimulus package that almost seemed like infinite money printing approved, but I'm not sure if that's actually gone through all the stages of approval yet. Seemed to be holding.
But maybe we'll talk about that with JF. I wanted to focus mostly on the biology and specifically on the relationship of viruses to his theory, and maybe some of what we talked about in our evolutionary debate. Let me just finish these and I'll get to that. So I had shown this before, and these are kind of like the genetic mapping of the various strains, and I don't even know the DNA. And I wanted to ask JF his little insight, or if this is something, what type educational background level could someone garner from this information, and in relation to me and JF's debate on evolution, is this natural selection in process that whether evolution speciations happen or not, that this is this coronavirus is a textbook example of evolution, and that's what this map is showing. So let me before JF,
that the virus itself evolved, and also that it places a selection pressure upon humans. So there's like two sources of evolution.
Well,
there's
I want to
virus to become itself, and then what effect?
I didn't want to share the. Yeah, I didn't want to steer the show into. Just there's going to be a very complicated issue, like what are viruses, where do they come from, what are they doing, and so the axioms of your worldview make a huge difference if your evolutionary understanding of what viruses are, and some of the evidence for people in terms of debating, is evolution a true theory or not. This process that the virus is doing right now is natural selection. Could that lead to evolution? Yes, I want to discuss that with JF in relation to the debate we had on that issue. So let me show a little information for people watching, because I want this to be more informative for people that are watching. They're just going to learn something about the virus and how we can understand it better, what's going on. So when I debated JF about evolution, one of the arguments I gave was life comes from life. There's no example of life not coming from life. And then JF said, no, what about viruses? What about proteins? And to me, I was like, well, that's not life. Life comes from life. So this is a classic example. So even on Wikipedia, there's no unequivocal definition of life. Most current definitions in biology are descriptive. Life is considered characteristic of something that preserves, furthers, or reinforces its existence in the given environment. This characteristic exhibits the following traits: homeostasis, organization, metabolism, growth, adaptation, response to stimuli, and reproduction. And then, in Church of Entropy, alternative definitions, there's the entropy in life. The physics perspective, living beings are thermodynamic systems with an organized molecular structure that can reproduce itself and evolve as survival dictates. Thermodynamically, life has been described as an open system which makes use of gradients in its surroundings to create imperfect copies of itself. Hence, life is a sustained chemical system capable of undergoing Darwinian evolution. A major strength of this definition is that it distinguishes life by the evolutionary processes rather than its chemical composition. Others take a systemic viewpoint that does not necessarily depend on molecular chemistry. Systematic definition of life is that things are self-organizing and autopoietic, self-producing. So, and then, viruses. So our viruses, should they be considered life as alive, is controversial. They are most often considered just as replicators rather than forms of life. They've been described as organisms at the edge of life because they possess genes evolved by natural selection and replicate by creating multiple copies of themselves through self-assembly. However, viruses do not metabolize, and they require a host cell to make their new products. Virus self-assembly within host cells has implications for the study of the origins of life, and it may support the hypothesis that life could have started as self-assembly organic molecules. So this is the large reason I wanted JF to come on. And just before he comes on in a second, let me read from his book, The Revolutionary Phenotype, and see his definition where he defines the revolutionary phenotype. So I think we have Jean-Francis here, and I appreciate you coming. If you want to check your sound, make sure everything's working.
Absolutely. I think it's good.
I was just going to read your definition here of the revolutionary phenotype. So you have 4 definitions on page 26. The first chapter is the offspring, reproductive organism produced through the same process by which its parents were created, thus being able to continue the replication of their inherited genes in an unbroken line of descent. Parent, reproductive organism that produces offspring. Revolutionary phenotype, a reproductive organism that produces through a means that differs from how its native replicator created it, thus starting a new line of descent which does not transmit the native replicator's gene in an unbroken line. We have native replicator, an organism that produces a revolutionary phenotype, the parent of the revolutionary phenotype. So yeah, that was the main reason. I mean, besides, I've been watching your coverage from coronavirus a few months now, and review of the scientific literature, and I started streaming on it because it's the biggest news story. I'm under lockdown even here in Michigan. I was just showing those maps. Metro Detroit has well over 1,000 cases now. People are dying, and we had that big debate on evolution, and we talked a long time about viruses. Are viruses life? What does it mean to replicate? And your theory is very interesting, besides its implication to philosophy and other things, but just in terms of what's going on, like why are people dying? Like, a few weeks ago, we're looking at these maps, and now right here in Detroit, we're running out of ventilators.
Yeah, it is quite surprising because I was interested in RNA viruses way before the coronavirus became popular. And now I see that people are interested more and more in learning about them. I was interested in them because they demonstrate that you can be linked to another life form, not through parental relationship, as you were reading the definitions. There's kind of 2 ways you can parent an organism. You can parent an organism by being its true parent, genetic parent, and then you can parent an organism by essentially creating it out of nothing, creating a self-reproducing machine that does not inherit your genes. About 4 billion years ago, at the onset of life as we think about it on planet Earth, there was an event of phenotypic revolution, and in fact, the original life form that did it is an ancestor, a genetic ancestor of the coronavirus, not a genetic ancestor of us. And this other life form is what led to us, what led to DNA existing. And this happened not through parenting, but through revolutionary, a phenotypic revolution, which is the act by which you create another life form.
Yeah, I was fumbling around there. I apologize with the screen share, but I was trying to show. I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out how to get my screen share working. I apologize. But this map here.
Oh yeah. Very interesting map. I mean, there's lots to say about it, but what it shows is that vastly, there are certain strains that are evolving specifically for the geographic location in which they find themselves. See how all the red spots are gathered together in branches that seem naturally divided from the rest. This is indicative to me that there is a major strand in the US that is genetically distinct from the ones in Europe and Asia, although you will see red circles pretty much throughout. That means there were other events of penetration of other branches of the coronavirus. You can see them as isolated red circles in the bottom branches, but the major strand that is mostly found in the US has evolved on its own and constitutes a separate branch of the descendants of the coronavirus.
So, just in terms of your theory, and when I agreed with you, like, this is factual. This is, if you want to call it evolution, this is natural selection. Whether there's evidence of something jumping from one species to another, that can't be replicated. Like, this could be replicated in terms. So this is not a revolutionary phenotype. This is just the natural processes of how a virus evolves and slowly changes. So the first coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, that's not a revolutionary phenotype. That's just regular.
No, definitely we're faced with a just normal evolution here. It is those are all the descendants of a single strand of coronavirus, which is hypothesized to have been emerging in China from a contact with animals, but could have been elsewhere also. It's not impossible that it could have been generated elsewhere and transmitted into China after. Now, you were mentioning the deaths and everything. I would point out that we may be suffering here from overdiagnosis and overcaring because we just have more information today. I don't think that we're faced with a pandemic that is especially deadly compared to other pandemics. To be honest, it's probably, in fact, pretty small compared to what's been happening every 5 years, every 10 years for hundreds of years. And so we should not let ourselves be impressed too much by these numbers rising. What we're faced with probably is increased scrutiny and selective scrutiny. For the first time, science has the tools to scare us with these numbers and to track it worldwide. This is not something we could do even 10 years ago. We couldn't have that level of tracing and that level of information spreading at the minute level where we can know exactly the number of cases that are known all across the world. And so let's be careful here. The coronavirus is not showing anything special compared to previous pandemics, other than that it's dragging everyone's attention.
So, JF, do you know if this rate of mutation is common for this type of virus?
I haven't seen the rate of mutation be quantified, but the branches that we see there, it is totally expected. That being said, it's also a case where we are sequencing much more than other viruses. If we had sequenced other viruses as much as we did and as fast as we did with the coronavirus, we would get pretty much the same branches. And it should be noted that not all of these are cases of natural selection. When you see differences between the American strand, the European strands, the Chinese strands, they are not necessarily indicative of natural selection having happened, but they could. What they can also be is random variation that do not impact the virus functioning.
I heard in a more conspiracy theory, but like obviously there's a ton of these things. They estimate there's about tens of millions per milliliter of an infected person's mucus or gastrointestinal fluid. So you're talking huge amounts. One person could possibly produce billions, tens of billions, maybe more of these. And even if a person's infected, that it's unlikely that they're infected by one virus, that they probably, if they get some mucus or something that's infected, it probably contains thousands, tens of thousands of the virus. But in terms of the conspiracy theories of the bioweapon, that they would have had to have pre-made all of these strands beforehand for it to become a worldwide pandemic. And that's what they said, that usually viruses, when they mutate, become less deadly, and it's very rare that there'll be mutations that make it more deadly or mutations that help it spread. And would it be possible, we also want to ask you about the possible genetic or racial or regional differences, but just in terms of that, when you mentioned that all of these varieties, and even the pangolin, I wanted to ask you about the pangolin and possibly just environmentalism, mass extinction, deforestation, these various things, that maybe basically all of these strands had existed in a pangolin's stomach before also.
Well, as far as the bioweapon hypothesis, a bioweapon wouldn't be a virus that cannot evolve. In principle, someone could create a strand of the virus, seed it in the human population. The virus would, of course, continue to evolve and mutate, especially the type of virus we're talking about, which is single-strand RNA, the coronavirus, and that means they are the most mutable virus compared to DNA or double-strand RNA viruses. They are the ones with the highest mutation rate. So if you were to create a bioweapon, you wouldn't have to have created all of these strands. You would have to create just one, and it would eventually mutate into all the others. That being said, I'm not saying it's necessarily a bioweapon, but it doesn't require to have created all of the strands. That being said, you were asking about the death and whether the virus evolves toward being less deadly, it can, but it doesn't have to. You have to understand the virus interest is not in killing you, nor in finding you. The virus interest is in replicating, and sometimes that means borrowing so much from your cells that you die. But your death is essentially accidental from the evolutionary perspective of the virus. The virus is just seeing you as an environment, the same way if you were to go in a forest, you would be chopping trees because you say, oh, this is good for heating for my family. And you'd be effectively killing trees. And when you step on the floor, you might even be killing some insects and some other life forms. But you wouldn't be doing so intentionally. And that's pretty much the way the virus travels into our lungs. It is by seeing that there is a resource for its proteins to be produced. And that's essentially what it does. So the reason a virus would evolve to be less deadly is that it is hypothesized that the less deadly the virus is, the more likely it is to spread. And so there may be an effect by which too aggressive of a virus would eventually kill its host too quick to spread efficiently. That being said, the reason we've always been worried about high incubation period viruses is that this fact that I just stated is not true for high for long incubation period viruses. In other words, if the viruses has 14 or 21 days before killing you, it won't really evolve toward being less deadly because it's 14 or 21 days that he has inside of you are enough to spread himself. And so there won't be a need for him to evolve a less deadly strategy. This is why the great scare of the epidemiologists forever has been high incubation time and a deadly virus that's deadly only a month after the infection.
Yeah, we've been discussing this a lot recently, and maybe from a more metaphysical level in terms of, I said, if you want to beat the virus, you have to think like the virus in terms of questions like free will, or is the virus a life form? So, to anthropomorphize a virus, to say that the virus does what's in its own best interest, or maybe the virus doesn't necessarily do what's in its own best interest, but evolutionary forces will, through processes of natural selection, will automatically force the virus to do what's in its best interest. But if it's just simply a replicator, they say the virus doesn't necessarily care if it destroys all of humanity and then destroys itself. It's just going to keep on replicating, even if that means eventually everything in the universe is only it, and then the whole universe was destroyed or something. Or you're saying there's some sort of force that would bring the virus into doing what's in its own best interest?
Well, the force that's making the virus act as if it had interest is natural selection. So it's simply the fact that viruses that do not deploy the behaviors and proteins that would help their replication, they are eventually replaced by those that do. And so eventually you find yourself with only populations of viruses that all act in ways as to replicate themselves. That's just because the others have been eliminated. Now, it's true that the virus wouldn't have a brake system to understand that if he kills all of the humans, he won't have host anymore. That would be foresight, and natural selection doesn't allow foresight. What happens is that natural selection will push this virus to use our resources in the most effective way from the perspective of its reproduction. If that includes killing us, it will. But if that includes potentially not killing us and being more living populations at a different rate, early in the debate.
You show this. I showed this right before you came on, but like obviously in Michigan, I'm in Metro Detroit, and over 90% of the cases are here. In the rest of the state, it's fine. In New York, it's largely the same. I mean, they're all blue if they have any cases, but most of these counties have less than 10 cases, and some of them 0. As where in New York, thousands, and all the county tens of thousands. The New York Times map is largely the same when you that's not necessarily a genetic racial thing when you look on a global thing, but certainly the sparsity. And when you answer that, I'd also like to ask you about like kind of the FOCI and what it means in terms of the shutdown. Can we just shut down large urban areas or various things? But yeah, please, if you could explain that.
Yeah, so of course the virus, like any virus, would be extremely more prevalent in areas that are highly populated. So the density of the population matters a lot. The lifestyle of the population also, because when you get into less dense area, it's not just that people are living away from each other through separate houses and big lands. It's also their behavior. They don't necessarily exchange hands and ramps and public doors as much as someone from downtown. So of course, density of the population is the first factor. Now there was speculation early in the following of this virus that it would affect Asians in particular, and it's my impression that the more the facts are deployed in front of us, the more we realize that this was a wrong hypothesis. I've always said that it was probably wrong because it stemmed from a single scientific study that had a single lung from an Asian man, and they had found that the Asian man had 5 times more ACE2 receptors in his cells. And I said, we don't know why he had 5 times more. We don't even know if most of the population has 5 times more. Maybe it's because he was old. Maybe he had blood pressure problems. And if he was taking blood pressure medication, it would increase his ACE2 receptors. So what we find is that essentially this was a wrong hypothesis. The virus is extremely penetrating the population of European descent and elsewhere outside of China. So wrong hypothesis. What areas of the world might still be spared based on considerations like sunlight and humidity. This could explain why the infections seem lower in Africa, South America. Maybe it's the climate, something like this. That being said, it's also possible that we're just completely deceived by the numbers and that these countries just don't have the means to test as much as we do, and they're less paranoid about it. And maybe that's just why the circles seem smaller in these countries.
While you're on that topic, I don't assume you're following the cases in the Jewish community, but there was the first lawyer in Manhattan who was Orthodox Jew who wasn't able to trace how he got it, but he was the first infection in New York, and they couldn't trace him to anyone coming from Wuhan. And then he spread it within his community to tens of people. And Orthodox Jews appear to be getting this virus much quicker than other people, possibly Jews in general. Though obviously it comes from China and just the hit. And can that be 100% explained by communal factors? Maybe gathering constantly, sharing germs, having large families, taking care of each other, kids, or eating in these various things, plus being more likely to travel, that would explain the disproportionate amount of Jews infected. And obviously Jews live mostly in urban areas. Or would it be reasonable to think that maybe there is some sort of genetic propensity? I mean, they had those studies about vitamin C or the ACE2 receptors that said next to Asians, Jews seem to be the next most susceptible to it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't reject this hypothesis, but the main thing I would go for is the lifestyle. Jews are very tight-knitted together while being spread across the world. They have family reunions, they live in areas that are more densely populated, and they have international networks of relationship that they see relatively often, enough to see the various communities around the world. So I would bet that that's the reason.
I could get these off my desktop, then I'll hand it over to Jennifer to ask, just if you could help us understand, some of these news stories. I think I shared this with you on Twitter, but here's an epidemic calculator, and I did my best to explain it, where it predicts the outcome, and you have your R factor, which I guess is, one thing is the intervention on day, how long it takes you to intervene, and I guess it's from the first death in your area. So I'm not sure if these are in your area or in the world. And then they have this R factor, which is, I guess, the rate of transmission, how many people a typical person transmits it to, where this one might be between like 1.5 to 5, it's unknown. Measles is from the worst at like 14. You have other factors like the reproduction number, transmission time, patient duration, infections, and then there's different clinical dynamics. And you do this and you play around and you could see estimates, and I guess that's what the experts are using. And unfortunately, the last few weeks, the experts have been right in these type exponential growth, like you could see here. This chart, I just did a few days ago, and it was 20,000 cases a day. Now 2 to 3 days later, like they said, it doubled and it's 40,000. You could see the curve, just like straight up, where God forbid you could see millions and millions of people having it, and you're like, are we overreacting? Also, the Atlantic, interesting, has the number of tests being given. So just a new statistic to factor that they are showing here in various areas, the number of test giving. But I'm not sure on this meter. Did you have any insight on this, JF, or this kind of meaningless for a layperson to try to play around with something like this?
No, I think it's a great model, so everyone should play with it and have fun with it. It's a mathematical model, and it's based on what it tells us is that to what extent would a successful social quarantine or social distancing strategy, if you take for granted that it will be successful, how much are you going to stop in terms of the impact on fatalities, in terms of the impact on hospitalization, on infections? That being said, I would be careful into interpreting this as the reality. There are certain things that are not taken into account into this graph. One of those is, look at the x-axis, 100 to 200. That is an hypothesis where you would successfully shut down the economy and implement a massive social quarantine over 100 days. America has been doing it for about 10 to 15 days, depending on which state you're in. And people are already going insane. And there's already a stimulus package from the government that is the biggest ever in any circumstances like that. It's a wartime type of expense. And we are only 15 days in. This is the hypothesis that you would be able to maintain such a thing over 100 or 200 days. This is an enormous amount of time. It's going to be long, and I don't think that the American people can hold. I think that there is too much rent, there is too much financial pressure on owners, on corporations of all kinds, that this is not feasible. On top of it, what this graph doesn't show is what happens when you send people back to work. What happens if you send them back to work after a 15 days of social quarantine, after 50, after 100, after 200 days? And the fact is, we may be faced with an impossibility of escaping the end result, which is that basically 60% of the population has to be infected. Either you do it now or you do it in 100 days from now while ruining your economy. So the big question is a political one. It's one of values. Is it worth shutting down the economy in its entirety when we don't even know if we're going to save one life with this? In fact, we could make it worse. There are scenarios in which you are so effective at social quarantining that you don't build any sort of immunity, and when you come back to work, it amplifies the spreading because it all happens at once.
Jennifer?
I'm enjoying just listening in, and let me know if my subject matter expertise is needed, Doooovid.
Okay, yeah, it's just, she at least understands the mathematics.
I was doing an interesting calculation about R versus K selection, and the size ratio between a virus and the planet is about the same as the size ratio between a human and the solar system. Isn't that neat? Just did
Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess politically, we're both libertarian and we're very cautious, and it's almost scary to see the amount of power. Although, yeah, from my perspective, like as someone like non-essential activities. Like I try to refrain from non-essential activities, period. So at least the concept of the shutdown, society slowing down, rethinking. But what about the straight environmental concerns that say, we debated on vegetarianism, and I showed you the models of the ecological footprints and the overuse of the world's resources, and that there was no model of meat eating that with the population that led to a sustainable outcome, if you remember those studies. But in relation to this, is the virus largely, if it's caused by the pangolin or extinction of species that were hidden in some rainforest and were carrying viruses, or global warming and these various things, is it likely that this is directly related to that, meaning that we should fear that these are going to get more and worse? Or is it just like 100-year fluke, like the Spanish influenza, or the earthquake of the century, that it's hitting in our lifetime right now?
Yeah, I don't think there's any special cause. I don't think we'll be able to trace to say, oh, it was global warming and then it pushed the pangolins into a city and then the pangolins interacted with humans. And so therefore we have caused ourselves the coronavirus. Because these things are pretty regular and it's being handled in ways that it couldn't be handled in the past, and it's leading to fewer and fewer deaths. All of these pandemia that we're looking at in the past have killed millions of people. We're still not on path to be killing millions of people. And my suspicion right now is that there are millions more of people who have the coronavirus than those that are labeled as such. So we have approximately 500,000 confirmed cases. I would bet that at this moment, there's between 10 to 100 million people on Earth that have the coronavirus. Many of them asymptomatic, many of them it will just feel like a common cold, and that's just regular. As far as the pangolin hypothesis, as far as I know, the only data came very early. It was one of the first studies on the coronavirus. They used a method that looks at synonymous codons. So synonymous codons are sequences of 3 bases in the virus genome that are leading to the same results. So sometimes you can have AAG, it will lead to a certain amino acid. Sometimes another code, like maybe AAT or AAA, will lead to exactly the same amino acid being added to the protein. So it's a part of the code in the RNA of the genome that doesn't change the output, but it does change in the sense that it allows us to trace back which kind of animal this virus lived in for most of its evolutionary history. And this study had shown that the anticodons of the coronavirus are compatible with pangolin to some extent, or snakes to a bigger extent. So I don't know why scientists prefer the pangolin hypothesis, because in fact, the method had revealed that the anticodons were closer to those of the snakes than the pangolin. But I think that scientists don't like snakes because snakes are not seen as natural reservoirs of viruses for the mammals that we are. And maybe they think pangolin, there's a better chance. That being said, based on this evidence, we can think it's maybe the pangolin or maybe the snakes too.
And also the pangolin's prominency of importance in the Wuhan market.
Yes, and that I don't know to what extent they were selling pangolins. Could be, yes.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I guess, it's somewhat related to your big debate with Stefan Molyneux. If you say, okay, me and Church of Entropy have the tendency to want to connect karma, morality, and ethics to science, as were you, as certainly as a moral nihilist, but even just as like the true lab coat scientist, and say there's no place for your morality and ethics, at least in the factoring of understanding it. Maybe from the Trump level of medicine, you have to factor in the morality and ethics, but from the pure scientific perspective, just like some karmatic explanation why the pangolin makes sense is not scientific.
Yes, but as far as to me, the question of the pangolin is a scientific question. It's a question of fact. I don't think there's any moral value to asking whether it comes from the pangolin or not.
If there was some higher force or power So you say, okay, it's a power of natural selection to balance things. Spreading of viruses, a natural turf battle between the various species on Earth, as opposed to like some higher force that would have delivered punishment onto the world through this method. Like, look at the pangolin that you so mistreated. So from this very species that you mistreated this badly is going to come wrath to humanity.
This is not my position, just to be super clear.
Okay.
Well, it's somewhat,
Well,
it's more my position. It's like, no, I believe in science, but I also believe in possible spiritual forces of influence that if there was a moral balance, to say you can't just keep on killing and torturing these animals, and that God acts through natural processes, and therefore it'd be a connection of science and morality, which obviously from a university or any normal understanding of science, you can't really do it. But from the person's mind, I think the natural tendency is to moralize science.
What do you mean by morality?
Well, if there is a question, why do the wicked prosper? Why do the righteous suffer? And you're saying there is no question. Like, I don't know. There is no reason why the righteous should prosper and the wicked should suffer. So coronavirus comes and there's no correlation. So to say, you want to make a correlation, and even in terms like, the alt-right, immigration, all these various things, everybody could read into coronavirus, like, it's not going to end till the third temple's built, to saying, oh, we finally closed down the borders, or this is going to finally be statistical evidence that immigration and multiculturalism could actually put your life at rest. But there's a natural tendency for people to want to moralize statistics and science.
We still haven't defined what morality even is, though.
Well, you don't see that from your perspective, JF. I mean, you say, as a scientist, you would say, I have to wait for the facts. Is there any evidence that immigration and multiculturalism has made this worse? Or is it possible that even with zero immigration and multiculturalism, that this virus would have hit us just as bad? And saying, as a scientist, you might have speculation, but you would have to wait for the facts to unfold and the proper evidence to make some sort of conclusive evidence on whether there is any connection between immigration and multiculturalism, the spread of coronavirus.
Well, I like to think of factual matters separately from moral matters. That being said, the moral world is influenced by facts because it's trying to change facts. So Church of Entropy is asking, how should we define moral? I think it's a decent question to start with. So morality, I guess, to me, what it means is morality is a system of classification for things to be good or bad or better or worse than each other, such that one of the outcomes can be selected above the others.
So then what's good?
So good is what people prefer and bad is what people don't prefer.
Okay, so we have like a human-centric idea on morality about preferences. I would define it as minimizing that which minimizes suffering. So I guess you could argue, if things are according to your preference, you'll suffer less. So maybe that's the same definition, maybe not. I tend to judge by results.
That's not so much a definition of morality, but it's a position of metaethics about what should be the end goal of the choice. So the problem in that view is that you're not merely defining morality, you are setting it up for what it will be about. Therefore, you say that we should reduce suffering, and so you're a consequentialist. Is that correct?
Maybe. I mean, there is a fair bit of reverse engineering that goes on in my scientific approach. So I suppose I always the way I put it is that truth is that which exists whether or not we do. So it's neutral. Morality is a particular system of values. My subjective, quote unquote, preference on morality is the minimization of suffering. And I assert further that the suffering is minimized through maximum knowledge of what is the objective truth, because it coincides with the case-selected strategy, which is imposed by a finite planet size.
So if tomorrow everyone was to die of the coronavirus and there's no more human beings on Earth, you would have reduced suffering to the maximum. You would have attained the most moral end according to your definition.
I don't approach it that way because my system accepts reincarnation through conservation of energy, since the mind has energy that it's conserved in some form. So the shock of dying would be calculated into the total suffering equation. The being forced reincarnated into a species that wasn't human because there were no human avatars, quote unquote, available would also be a form of suffering, because most people wouldn't want to go from human to like dog. So yeah, my system wouldn't say that every human dying because of a virus would be less suffering. That would only be true if my system didn't accept reincarnation. But I take your point.
Just chime in here. I think if you frame it, Church of Entropy's framing is in line with Hinduism, as opposed to Western utilitarianism, which could lead to atheistic philosophy, wouldn't put it in terms of ahimsa, minimizing suffering, but would put it in terms of maximizing pleasure. But there is quite a bit of overview between the Hindu systems that are generally theistic and the utilitarianism, and I kind of favor JF's side of the argument, at least against Molyneux, because I want to say, like, there has to be spiritual powers intermediary. There has to be some sort of spiritual force that equalizes morality in the material realm. And if not, then JF is right. Like, you can't have moralities. You can't build up morality from a mechanistic system. And that's one of the arguments I used for you against evolution.
So you'd rather agree with an atheist than me then, Doooovid?
No, I think in terms of my preference, I would have rather seen JF beat Stefan Molyneux, because JF's position to me is that's my prime opposition, is where Molyneux is coming on like he's saying he could have the best of both worlds and the benefit of religion and morality and science and evolution and all these things. So it's like, no, you can't. If if you really want to have, because JF is giving a proper view of the implications of evolution, and Stefan Molyneux is not. Stefan Molyneux in reality does need to come on to spiritual forces to justify his arguments, and so that's that was my take on it. And Jennifer obviously has her own philosophy that's a combination of morality and science, or unification in her idea.
Now, Doooovid has been talking about how the virus has changed the political discourse and the political game. And I think there's more than a silver lining in this virus. There's a large brick of pure silver coming from this virus. And indeed, people are now aware of the price of globalism. You were asking, did immigration make this worse? Absolutely, certainly. Our policies of immigration is what has created a network of people who need to travel around the world.
You said that let's say, according to your theory, it's only a matter of time. You said, like, no, the virus would have hit everybody in the world. It just would have taken longer without immigration. And you do need to wait for these numbers to come in. You do need to say, in a year from now, do people in countries that have no immigration die at a lesser rate? Or it's possible that it does hit them a few months later, and there is actually no statistical correlation between this and immigration.
Well, to be clear, I think that you are correct, that there could be an effect where you are bound to have some event of infection, but that event of infection will boil down to some form of immigration or tourism. But definitely the fact that we travel in planes, the fact that some people on this planet need to be in China one day and in Canada 3 days later to see one side of the family and the other, that is a severe engineering problem of humanity that we only now realize the cost of, and that were never accounted for when politicians started pushing for open border immigration. Now we need to account it for. We need to understand that there will be a price to disclaim the superiority of diversity, which was never demonstrated in the first place anyway. But there will be now a negative number to add in terms of the cost socially, in terms of health, in terms of culture, but also in terms of spreading capabilities and speed. I think that there are isolated regions on this planet that will never get the coronavirus. It's my impression that I may be far enough from civilization myself so that I may never get it.
Yeah, I mean, because you probably were successful in the big city. I worked in New York, and you said on your show, like, I did building permits, and you actually had to have like evacuation plans for certain buildings for SARS, Ebola type outbreaks. And I changed my diet. Like I gave up breakfast, because like I never wanted to use a public bathroom because like I was scared. New York is a difficult place to maintain being clean in. And you're saying like, I do not want to be in the position where I'm going to be forced to use a public restroom. So I just, for at least sitting down. So I had to just abandon breakfast. And
now that's a cost of globalism.
Well, in health-wise, so like I still disagree with you generally about culturally and economically multiculturalism and immigration. But I say like health, health is the reason I didn't stay in New York City. And if you were looking at this, going back and saying it's not going to be like a God forbid a race war or something that's going to bring down society, it was more likely to be a health epidemic like this. And maybe you were sitting back even talking to the big names in politics and culture, but you say, it's actually more likely to be a virus that does this in, or your idea about artificial intelligence or eventually mechanizing the replication process. But in terms of that, I wanted your expertise on analyzing the various scenarios, and presumably you've chosen your lifestyle because you already have done this, and maybe they'll help people around the world that also the irony that the moral nihilist is you're doing this huge public service for hundreds of thousands of people. Me and Jennifer were noting the irony in that, remember
Stefan Molyneux was streaming himself playing video games, and JF's like, here's what you do to save yourself from the virus. Like,
well, I'm saying you don't have a philosophical moral imperative to be a good person and give back to humanity. But like then, ironically, you're providing free public information at a great level to hundreds of thousands of people. So props for that. Whatever political or cultural disagreements we might have, but look at the scenarios going forward, and look at the oil price where you say, okay, this lasts so long that it permanently ruptures the global supply chain and is like a permanent. God forbid it could be a permanent blow to globalism, but could set it back that the global industrial corporate power structures won't be able to maintain the shutdown. The distribution supply chains will, oil prices are so low, will eventually not be able to maintain the infrastructure, and the infrastructure will collapse. And if you look at the oil prices right now at $20, that's low enough that you can't frack. And I don't know if you're in like tar sands area of Canada there, but I think you need oil prices to be close to $60 an hour for that oil extraction to be valuable. So, if somehow Trump is right in April 15, Easter, we're back up and, God forbid, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people die, but we're back up and the economy gets going and we're chugging oil faster than ever before to catch up. Or, maybe a little bit of a shutdown. People don't realize they don't have to consume as much as they thought, or like the various like catastrophic syndromes that, probably your lifestyle demonstrates that you had thought about before, where it's like, oh man, like I wish I had done what JF did a few years ago and like got myself property in the middle of nowhere.
Yes, I think that the possibilities are there. I think that earlier in the crisis, I had the impression that we could have an absolute crash. Right now, I'm not so convinced that it's the most likely. I think that the Trump stimulus package will, unfortunately, most likely restore us back to a functioning economy, and that this will be remembered just as a passing thing, and that will be back to normal. I would have wished that the coronavirus crisis would have been an occasion for people to realize that they have everything that they need in a simple life, and to see major drops in consumption across the planet. I'm afraid that we will not learn that. I'm afraid that stimulus packages and the general anxiety of Trump at restoring the economy as quick as possible will be back to normal in a couple of weeks, unfortunately.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of factors that put in how it's going to change culture, and like I usually turn to your channel for the biology behind news, and sometimes you're interesting guests, and then also the streaming, because largely I followed your advice on streaming. I got my start from Luke Ford, who largely got not it started media, but it started streaming from his appearance on You and Worski. And almost like half of the people who watch me or people I interact with, are at least in your network. And it's interesting, the viral comparison, because of spreading to networking. We probably have lower numbers than normal because something's going on in the Google algorithms, or
when you use COVID-19 in the title, it cuts your audience in 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, and I was doing this more informative for my regular followers or people who view my programs that wanted a more in-depth understanding, prognosis, expertise. And it's also interesting because you're a biologist as opposed to a doctor. I go to synagogue with 20 doctors. I don't go to synagogue with any biology PhDs. Most people, at least, God forbid, I said you're the country boy with a high IQ who didn't realize that a PhD in biology wouldn't help you. And if you had just became an MD, you'd be you'd probably be in the danger of treating coronavirus. But economically, ironically, doctors are not expertise in what your expertise at, and people now are turning to doctors, and they're not turning to. I even know an epidemiologist who wrote a textbook on medical epidemiology, but no, I don't think his knowledge in terms of the viruses is actually as good as yours. And how does that fit in your view of streaming or academics now that like your expertise is maybe it's not in demand? I don't know if you're getting calls on it or if there's
I think there's large interest in the coronavirus. Of course, we're facing shadow banning from YouTube, so it's still a reduction of the crowd, but my goal is not so much to have big crowds, so I'm happy with what I have. I just wish that YouTube would just be neutral about this, because there's no reason why you would drive people away from an important health-related subject, but they do. Yes, that being said, the doctors, they don't know much about the phylogeny of viruses, to be honest. They see viruses, most doctors, at least some of them may be biologically inclined, but most doctors, they see viruses as, okay, let's put a label on them. Okay, it's COVID-19. All right. And what does it do? Does it do lower respiratory pathway infections? Does it tend to lead to pneumonia? Or is it generally just the throat? What are the likelihood? What are the things I need to pay attention to? That's what a doctor needs to know, because the doctor doesn't really fight the virus. He fights the symptoms emerging in your body as the virus attacks you. So for the doctor, what's important is it likely going to lead to a pneumonia? Should I pay attention to this possibility? Has the person shown other disorders of respiratory or cardiac function that should worry me? Those are the questions that most doctors will care about.
Well, and also, it's almost algorithmic, where once they diagnose it, the doctor has limited terms in what they could do. They just give the prescribed, approved, treatment if it's a drug or therapy. And how would you describe the difference? I guess a vaccine is where you preemptively infect a person with a strain that will boost their immune system, versus some sort of treatment would be a different chemical or substance that somehow affects the ability of the virus to replicate?
Yeah, a vaccine is deploying somehow a dysfunctional version of the virus, either because it's been irradiated or it's been produced in labs, so that the virus doesn't really infect you, but your body learns to combat the the patterns of the virus, the structure of the protein are detected by your immune system, and you develop a resistance that way. And then there's medication. Medication concerning viruses is relatively a new thing. Most people had the philosophy that there will never be medications against viruses. There will only be vaccines. That being said, of course, it doesn't make sense. There had to be ways that we can block viruses, and tree therapy in the case of HIV is one example where you just slow down all of the mechanism that the virus needs to replicate. So hydroxychloroquine is the one that's emerging right now. We don't know if it's going to work. We don't even know if it's going to cause death. Maybe it will, because it does break a very important system in your body, which is the lysosomal system, the system of your cells that digest proteins and cuts them. But as it so happens, it also destroys systems that the virus needs, the coronavirus. So maybe it will work. We'll see based on the scientific studies. Trump seems to be full on deploying this drug as much as possible. And he may not be wrong. We'll see.
So now I'm remembering two more things I wanted to ask you. One thing, I guess, relatively quick. I read the Jack Ma Foundation's book on best practices out of China of beating the coronavirus, is like 60 pages. I'm not sure if you saw that yet. Came out like a week ago, sponsored by the Alibaba Foundation or whatever. But he mentions the type of equipment they used and what they're not doing in Italy, and they're not going to. My father's, who's a family practice doctor who's operating now, he was like, "There's no way we're going to do this in America." But the division between level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 1 where you have no infection, level 2 where you have possible infections, and then level 3 where you have guaranteed infections. And if you see in the pictures, like in Italy, they're putting like bags over people's head, where in China, in the level 3 area, they actually have oxygen tanks, and even Israel is implementing this now, where they have oxygen tanks within the doctor, so the doctor doesn't even need to breathe the oxygen of the room. But my father's just Michigan medicine, or what you see on TV, or Italy, it's saying that there's no way that we're going to be able to create this level 1, 2, 3 system. And then even now, where we have tens of thousands, millions of people, how are you going to change the culture to enforce that? And then moving forward, if you say is it possible that it is related to environment, climate change, and we're going to see more of these, that we will have to completely work over Western culture to kind of have our buildings and federal government systems and hospitals created in this level 1, 2, 3 system.
Yeah, it's fascinating, but that's true. Perhaps the system of incentives in China is different. I don't like communism, don't get me wrong, but perhaps communism being in a situation where the doctor is not just trying to get paid or save his ass. He is in a system that wants to improve the situation to the extent that any supplementary infection is more cost. Whereas from the capitalist perspective of the US, the doctor doesn't have a vested interest, at least not an economical one, in saving the nation. He just really has, the incentive structure is such that he has an interest in seeing the patients, passing them through the little card of their health insurance company, and cashing in on the health insurance company. Those are very different incentive structures. And it may lead to the inability of the US system to create that kind of stuff. Yes, it's very rare that I've never seen in hospitals a pressurized oxygen system. They call it positive pressure inside the suit. This is when you see a doctor with a puffed out bubble over his head, that's because there's air being constantly pushed in, and the air is filtered. I don't see that very often in American hospitals, and there's a decent question about whether we should see that.
Yeah, those are the pictures from Italy where it had, and I think those were over the patients that say they weren't able to create a level 3 security in Italy. So what they do is they put bags over the patients, and then the doctors just use the regular precautions. But like whatever reasons that Italy is doing isn't working. Clearly, they're not capable of replicating what the Jack Ma Foundation recommend.
Yeah, and I don't know about if Italy can be seen as a failure. Maybe it will, but at the same time, when we look at the age of the people dying, it may very well be just linked to the fact that Italy has an aging population, densely populated, and ultimately a system of health that is, I guess, funded by the state, and the state has limited resources. So it might just be that. I don't know how we will look at it in the future, but we must accept also just the natural reality of death, which is that if it's not the coronavirus coming to catch you, it's going to be cancer. And all these things I note are replicators, which is not trivial. The fact that cancers is a replicating cell in your body, and the coronavirus is also a replicator that comes from outside your body. This is just the sign that we have not evolved to live up to 100 years. That's just the truth. And I think that we are doing too much. We are giving too much attention to the particulars of the history of the death of a person, rather than just say that is what would have been called a natural death 100 years ago.
So I mean, is the shutdown in that theory? You're saying the shutdown is kind of like the boomers saying like we don't want to die?
Well, the shutdown is not so much that, because I didn't hear old people just protest to get a shutdown. The shutdown is a crisis of political correctness. The shutdown is reflective that no one wants to have their names attached to this coronavirus. And the leaders of our nations are unfortunately under a kind of state of extortion, where Boris Johnson, for example, wanted to go for the usual strategy, which is let the virus enter the country and develop a herd immunity and just accept that there will be some deaths, just like there is for the flu every year. And we're going to get out of it, hopefully not too damaged. That is what has been going on forever. But with this particular crisis, there is such an atmosphere of moral inquisition that Boris Johnson realized, now all of the deaths that are counted will be Boris Johnson deaths. And so he eventually had to change his strategy and call for a lockdown of the UK. I'm afraid that this is the circumstance in which leaders are taking decision right now. It's that they don't want to be seen as those who did nothing. But I think that a rational approach would be to explain to everyone, doing something it's not clear that it's going to work. You're trying an experiment here, and the experiment may very well, as we know as scientists, the experiment can very well be worse than the reality. It can be worse than doing nothing. And that is the hypothesis that currently everyone is ignoring.
Yeah, I meant to ask you also, because there's so many things that it's hard to even organize it to cover it topic by topic, but the nature of coronavirus that appears to be hitting elites first, which is possibly evidence of it being related to immigration and multiculturalism, like Prince Charles, and then just in the news, the president of Harvard, 18 Harvard professors, and the Jewish community. That simple explanation of globalism, that these figures are more likely to deal with people who travel more and would carry such a thing. Is that simple enough to explain why like elites seem to be disproportionately getting infected?
Absolutely. I think this explains the early point of infection in Washington, D.C. It explains why senators, why celebrities are catching it. Of course, this lifestyle, this globalist lifestyle that they live has cost, and we see it now. There's lots of farmers in the countryside in America and Canada that cannot possibly have had the virus yet, because they've literally talked to no one from outside their home or their village for the last months.
Yeah, I put on right before you came on. It was kind of the main idea. I appreciate you coming on, that I wanted to discuss. And I think of the Molyneux debate, where, in my impression, like he got caught up. He wanted to prove his system, and he needed you first to agree that, like, these four things are universally bad. And it's like, JF, will you say that murder is bad? JF, will you say that rape is bad? And he couldn't get you to do that. And because he couldn't get you to do that, he couldn't move on to completely build up his system. And it turned into kind of like a crap argument, because like the audience is like, why are you spending 45 minutes on this one point? And the various things about what does truth mean? Is he using a lowercase t truth or capital T truth? But related, I think if he really wanted to understand your system, it's based on your understanding of biology, and from there these things naturally come out like almost in a Euclidean way, or logical way, where I put on the Wikipedia definition of life right before you came on, where usually textbook definitions, you have homeostasis and all these various things that are a sign of life, and you're taking the Dawkins approach, like if it just replication is life, and your self-replication, and that's the key aspect. And for the non-scientific minded, I put it like basically you're taking Freudian psychology and you're applying it to the whole evolutionary process, where Freud says it doesn't matter what you do, you're doing it for the purpose of reproduction. And so like, I don't know if you've ever thought about that Freudian comparison to your theory, but if that implication where you're saying there's not necessarily a difference between the virus and us, we're just a more complex system, but like if you gave us an intention, the intention of human and virus is the same, and that's just simply to reproduce.
I agree that my view of life may look like Sigmund Freud's from the outside, because I do center on reproduction and I say everything that reproduces imperfectly is life. But I say it for a very different reason than Freud. Freud was just a delusional man who was stating random stuff here and there, and so he might just have happened to be right there accidentally, just like a broken clock is right twice a day. But I know why I define reproduction as the necessary condition for life. It's because reproduction is necessary for mutation and selection, which are the two features that allow evolution to occur. So if I'm saying that things that reproduce are alive, it's because I know that in the long term, evolution will apply to them and not to other things.
Yeah, and obviously me and Jennifer both have bias to favor the quantum mind. But from your perspective, you're saying like, the human life doesn't have to be a singular life form. We're a combination of life forms. Like you had these bacteria, you had these proteins. So according to you, you don't need a whole cell for life. A protein itself is life. A bacteria is life. And then you have maybe a cell that was formed to contain these different forms in an ecosystem, but it's not necessarily a separate ecosystem or a complex form. And then you have a human body. If you're going to look at it, like it's just the genes that provides unity in the human body. There's no reason that a cell's naturally work together with unity besides the pre-programming of the genes. And then you'd have Jennifer's theory, quantum mind, that possibly could be justified science. Well, maybe if the body creates an electromagnetic field or something, or some quantum effect that would give unity to the human. And I'm not sure if your perspective, you would say that there is no singular JF. JF in essence is a conglomerate of multiple trillions of living organisms, or if you could see the possibility of Jennifer actually knows more about this than I do for background in physics, of the some form of unified magnetic electromagnetic field that would unify the body.
Yeah, I think that the unified aspect of the body, the fact that we look like an individual that is consistent and that every piece of ourselves seem to work together well, that is essentially an illusion created by a long evolutionary process in which some of our cells were trapped. They were trapped in that they couldn't reproduce. They couldn't reproduce because probably of accidents, genetic accidents. And instead of just disappearing and not being able to reproduce, they started helping the sperm cells and the egg cells that could reproduce. In the same way, the sterile workers in ant colonies, they help the queen. And so I believe that the process that's happening here, the unification of the ant colony, is the same as the unification of the body, in that it is the orchestration of actions by sterile workers. And it just so happens that all of the cells in our body are sterile workers, except those in our ovaries and balls.
And that's through this phenotypic revolution, where somehow there's a unification of separate entities and a collection of them to work on another entity's behalf, like talk like the cell or something, where maybe RNA, protein, DNA, all these various things existed, and then a cell came into being and unified these separate beings to work for that entity. But to call the cell a single life form isn't even accurate. It's a conglomerate of life forms. and then the virus is something that's actually natural. You're saying that, like, in essence, like, we came from the virus. The virus is the progenitor to the first cells, and that the virus coming in, that, like, it's natural for viruses to dwell amongst us and interact with us, and in some sense, like, the virus is like our distant relative.
Yes, it is, but it is not linked by parentality. The virus, the original life form on Earth was, well, not necessarily the original, but that which preceded us was the RNA life form. It was making babies, and one of its babies has led to the coronavirus that we see today. But it was making other things than babies. It was developing certain biological strategies to store its genes in something else, and it made the error of creating DNA, and eventually DNA took over. Instead of staying as a sort of record of the genes of the RNA queen, it went on its own, started self-replicating, and eventually outperformed the RNA life form, such that today all that is left of the original RNA life form are the RNA viruses, like the coronavirus.
But there's no, from the moralistic aspect, there's no guarantee that, like, we're going to win and the viruses are going to lose. That could just be pressures. And I read the thermodynamic explanation of life, where you're saying, okay, we're just a temporary state of organization due to the input of energy from the sun, and once the input of energy from an external system subsides, there'll be no method to maintain the structure. So from that perspective, like, eventually even that virus will collapse. But there is no scientific reason to assume that, like, humans are going to win and the virus is going to lose.
No, there's none, and we all will lose at some point. We will all go the way of the dinosaurs. 99% of the species of the past are extinct, and 100% of the species will one day be extinct. So it may be related to the sun that will shut down eventually. There may be ecological catastrophes on planet Earth that makes it so that it even happens quicker than that.
Well, I argued with you. I mean, I wasn't an expert in the subject. Actually, that's part of how I became friends with Jennifer, was my debate with you. But there's also the entropy argument against evolution, that it breaks the principles of entropy, and there's different physical, than biological explanations of life, where physics would try to explain life within the limitations of entropy, and therefore we just have a temporary stable system because of a input of energy. But when that input of energy goes away, that life will go away also.
Well, those are true statements. Life cannot violate the laws of thermodynamics. If it was the case, living beings could be recycled into infinite energy machines. We could be perpetuating energy. Whatever is the mechanism by which we were to violate the law of thermodynamics, we could just use human beings to essentially violate the law of thermodynamics constantly. That is impossible in our universe.
Jennifer, I mean, I'm not sure how much time you have, but ironically, your fellow Quebecois, French-speaking, similar blood to you, preferred Doooovid in the evolution debate to JF and teams up with me to take you down.
My life seems to be peppered with these types of incidents, but I mean, my model's still an evolutionary model. It's a different mechanism for the changes. So I do accept, ultimately I accept causality. So whatever's going on now is a result of what happened in the past, and it's just a matter of interpretation. So yeah, I appreciate the discussion. I don't know. I know you didn't want it to turn into a big debate here, Doowovid, but if you've changed your mind, we can take it in that direction.
Well, I'm happy to. I mean, I don't know your time schedule, and Jennifer, we've been streaming. It's hard to stream yourself, and so like, you have a whole business model and setup, and I considered trying to purchase a bunch of things, and then I'd have to make like an economic decision. So I mean, generally, I do my research, and then I put together my research on a stream, or I do occasional chats with people. But I've been maintaining almost a year now Sunday night week in review with Jennifer, where we discuss these various things, because like I don't have it in me to do a public space every night, and certainly a value to holding it down. Oh, the irony of all these debates and characters in the chat to maintain them, just to maintain an audience and promote stuff and find interesting characters, to do that and like relatively, as I said, I base that off of you, and I've encouraged a lot of people to stream now. Jennifer, I probably even spent tens of hours at this point just helping people with their tech, showing them how to do basic things. And Jennifer, surprisingly or non-surprisingly, is better at programming than I am. I'm just using StreamYards, but she's the OBS programmer that has the graphics and all that stuff.
Very nice.
Yeah, we both really like your show, JF. Good work. Keep it up.
I'm happy that I have inspired others.
Yeah, I guess I'll throw in my last random thing was I watched Richard Spencer, and I was like, there's no way Richard Spencer would beat Doooovid at chess. Like, I don't know how to challenge him or if it's even worth doing, but it's like it's very unlikely, and it's possible, but I don't know if and like I've never just like put a challenge out there, but I was watching and I was like, it's got to be pretty unlikely, but it's possible. And I've got the chess set in the background.
I can try asking him, but I don't know about this chess. I'm not good at chess. I'm trying. When I was young, I was playing chess a lot, but I never brought it to the competitive level.
I've read over 100 books on it. I've spent tens of thousands of hours, and maybe not tens of, but yeah, I mean, that was my game. That's what I do as a hobby. So it'd be pretty, someone would have to spend years studying the game because the patterns are that intense. Although it's, kind of like biochemistry, when your book first came out, and it's like, I have so many other things to think about. And then all of a sudden COVID comes out, and that's the only thing I'm researching. And it's back to like, biochemistry and viruses and then you're hitting evolution. Maybe if you don't have to run the last comment or to think on what's the difference of, in terms of like this outbreak, your understanding of evolution, your revolutionary phenotype understanding of evolution, versus maybe religious-minded people who believe in intelligent design and understanding this outbreak. Is there a difference in how your revolutionary phenotype understands it than your basic evolutionist?
Well, the only difference is that once you read the Revolutionary Phenotype, you understand the relationship, the branch of life that's attacking us right now. And it's a very, very distant branch of life, whereas most biologists, before the Revolutionary Phenotype, they would see viruses as a bizarre observation. They wouldn't even know where they come from. I know where they come from. It's from 4 billion years ago, when it was decided on planet Earth whether DNA or RNA would be the dominant life form. That being said, I encourage people to look at this outbreak as a case of information overload. Think about what's different from a flu 10 years ago or 20 years ago. We didn't count how much of a strain of flu was killing human beings in how much countries. We didn't have dashboards to follow it live, but it was happening. It was killing our ancestors, and it will kill a part of the humans today on Earth. That is just a natural thing. Let us not forget that we are in an age of information overload, and we are over-tracking this disorder, really, to the point of ignoring other greater dangers. So let's be careful with this, because we are largely in a social phenomenon, not a viral one right now.
Was it possible someone like Dr. Fauci or even you could be, God forbid, you're saying like no one likes to see people suffering or dying, but if you're a scientist, you're saying like, I've been preparing for this moment my whole life, and all these ideas I've been studying, finally being implemented and are on the public scene. Like, is there information that you're trying to advance your theory or just understand evolution better that this outbreak would possibly provide, like if you were still doing research that questions that you couldn't have had answered, but that maybe this outbreak would, allow, or, certainly all the medical stuff where the transforming of cities and, the bailout package to the hospitals, and now they're transferring arenas into, these level things or something like that. But in your own field, is there certain like numbers that you're looking at that might advance your theory or outcome possibilities?
As a basic scientist, it won't change anything for me, because we knew that coronaviruses existed We had seen them in bats forever, and we knew that they were sometimes jumping to humans. What could be acquired from a scientific perspective is really pragmatic and practical understanding of, in this kind of social craze that we are in, how do people react? What does it lead to in terms of a strain on resources? Are there kind of defense aspect to this, in the sense that should the government of the US go above and beyond? Should we have 60,000 artificial respirators available at all times, just in case it happens? Should we be planning emergency procedures that people don't naturally converge toward, that corporations don't necessarily draw plans for? Should the government draw that kind of plan? And should we have kind of stocks of resources? And what are the good stocks to have to prepare ourselves for future social craze of the kind? That being said, from a fundamental perspective, this virus teaches us nothing.
What President Trump mentioned, and I was messaging Adam Green about it, because he was saying he likes social distancing. Generally, I like social distancing. I practice it largely my whole life. And, the cleanliness standards that, President Trump mentioned, he hopes the social distancing lasts past the virus, and, at least people standing, like giving each other more room. And also the increased cleanliness standards that you could possibly be a good takeaway, that it takes something like this for people, or maybe on a cultural level, that it'll be impossible that people won't be able to adhere to these standards, that it's something like cultural group strategies. Jennifer's big into these RK selection types, but historically, saying if you're R selected, it might be your strategy. That's why you're having a whole bunch of kids, in order that, God forbid something like this comes along, that you had enough kids, even if a few of them die, you're going to reproduce. Maybe historically things like this were reasons to have a bunch of kids, and now you take in mind, if we have K-type strategy, people controlling society, and they're going to adapt the rules in such a way that our selection no longer works, like social distancing and the various standards.
Yeah, there's a constant war going on in society between the classical model. I come from families that had 12 children, 14 children, something like this. So there is a difference between this lifestyle and the modern lifestyle, where people have one or two child. But oh my God, is it dramatic even more when you have only one child and they die for an accidental reason, and it's totally abolishing your line of reproduction. So I agree, make more babies is a good counsel, and I disagree with the changing of our world to a one-child or two-child policy, either through force or through economic pressure, which is what essentially our societies are converging toward. We give so little to the worker that they only have the money to have one child, and they have limited space in their home. That is dramatic, and we should work on it. But as far as I can see up to now, the coronavirus has been having positive effect on social changes. People are more doubtful, people are more careful, people don't engage in social interactions for nothing. So it's like a dreamland for an autist guy like me. It's like autism rises finally. People have been mocking socially awkward people forever. Now what? We're doing good. And in fact, the new world seems to be evolving in our direction. That will finally give an answer to those people who kept asking me on my chat, Jeff, why did autistic people survive? Well, why do you think? They have already all of the prepping attitudes that are currently being taught at great cost to the average person.
It'll be interesting to see also if people, so you say your alphas in real society, because of a lockdown, are turning to streaming. Will they be popular streamers? And I say probably not. That you can't just take a popular person in crowds and put them on streams and be popular. They'll demonstrate that that is like kind of the revenge of the autist, streaming. And do you read much science fiction?
No, I don't read fiction at all. I'm unable. I always get pissed at the first paragraph.
Yeah, me also. but unfortunately, like the first time we talked, I put your theories in the end of like, you know, the AI and stuff, although I mean, logically followed, but it was kind of like, you know, science fiction when I first read the book, and I was like, oh, who is this guy? What's his theory? And it seemed kind of like science fiction, but now I'm looking into it. You know, say, so, you know, let's say you have a genetic engineered solution that we can't solve this virus. And, you know, people like you are warning of the dangers of what might happen. But all of a sudden there's a solution where you could genetically engineer children that they won't be affected by the virus. And that, you know, that would be like the step that triggers your chain of events that leads to the destruction of man and the computer taking over replication.
Yeah, it could be, but it's very unlikely because the combating of a virus is a very dynamic process, and most likely the first genetic changes that we're going to want to apply to humanity are much more in the domain of removing disorders, removing genetic disorder, because that's easy. It's one letter of DNA, we know which it is, and we just get it out. Improving the human phenotype to be a virus combater is a totally different game because the virus changes, the virus evolves, and so I don't think that we would want to implement in babies things that could defend, that could protect them decades into the future.
Yeah, I guess so. But if somehow this virus just keeps on coming back and there's no solution, and then you could like change the DNA of the ACE2 receptor in a way that allows humans to, you know, still have the function that the ACE2 receptor did, but not be susceptible to this virus or something like that.
The problem is it's trivial for a virus to change from one configuration to the other. That's exactly what leads to their transfer between bats and humans. So you won't be handicapping someone for life by giving them an alternate version of their ACE2 receptor with the hope that you will keep them from getting the coronavirus, because the coronavirus will evolve to grab the new format of your molecule.
Okay, so I see, but I mean, but you think I'm understanding your concept, but it's not going to be something like this that triggers it.
No, you got it. It's just that it's too complicated. We won't start genetic modification by combating virus. It may come 100 years down the line, but it's not going to be the first events.
Well, I gave the example of chess because now the computer is significantly better at chess, and you know, the top players basically study from computers, and you could you know, lose to somebody and then plug the game in the computer and see, but you know, I wasn't really lost because the computer could have defended it, or you know, even won. And that makes sense that would happen with genetics. And you just think, I don't know, I know the computer beats me at chess every time, you know, moves instantly, no problem, there's nothing I could do, no strategy I could come up with to defeat the computer at chess. That somehow genetics would work like that also, that it doesn't, humans just aren't going to understand what the computer is doing. Somehow the computer is configuring, I mean, from your theory, that somehow the computer will be able to configure genetics in a way that humans can't understand, but it'll be within the human self-interest to just trust the computer, just like, you know, what's the best chess move, and you know, you could bring the best grandmasters around and analyze it, but you're probably better off going with the computer recommendation, and that will, you know, transform, you know, maybe UBI, Yang, and automation, these things, but specifically eventually that will take over replication.
Absolutely. That's my view. And I'm warning people against this because this would totally change our evolution. In fact, we wouldn't evolve anymore. We would essentially have computers designing us and evolving to design us.
Well, but say if you take, okay, the chess coach model, where you mean, you're not going to be a good chess coach telling people not to follow the computer recommendation because the computer just obviously beats the top players every game. And that, you know, in that perspective, like, you know, why wouldn't you turn your faith over to something that makes superior calculations?
Yes, and so the coach in chess that would tell his students don't listen to the computer is bad. He would be eliminated by competition if the option of listening to the computer was there. I think it's exactly what's going to happen to humans who decide to continue natural reproduction. They will be faced with Either we choose to engage with the machine to determine the genes of our child, or we get outcompeted by these masses of humans who have decided to trust the AI.
Well, I mean, then you're saying it's somewhat determinative, that there's nothing we could do collectively. I mean, I don't know. Me and Jennifer commonly ask people about their views on free will, and I don't know if anyone has asked you, how do you define free will, or what do you define as free will, especially as a evolutionary moral nihilist? Like, what is it? Is it, are you Freudian in nature, where you say, I have no free will, these are all just offshoots of my desire to replicate? But in terms of that, is it deterministic, where you're saying this is going to happen and it's not in the ability of man to stop it? There is no way that because mankind will make the correct decision to hand over the decision to the computer, because all the other alternatives are going to be worse.
Well, I'm not Freudian, but I'm a determinist. And so I do believe that the world is already set independent of our will. That being said, I don't think that means necessarily that the revolutionary phenotype will win. What we can do is decide altogether that we will not commit genetic modifications, that we will accept the reality of human suffering and life and death, instead of wanting to fix everything. There is a possible world in which we just decide for it not to happen, but we must decide, because if we let the things go naturally, someone's going to do it. Someone's going to want to protect their child from certain disorders, and then it's going to be a snowball effect where more and more features of our phenotype are modified by the AI until everything of it is under control. So I say we can decide altogether that we don't do it. And it's also a long establishment, a revolutionary phenotype. So it would happen across generations. We have occasions to fight the humans who don't want to enter this contract with us. We can do military interventions and pressures on countries that would try to benefit from genetic modifications.
Well, it almost sounds messianic, or certainly moralistic, not scientific, where you say, oh, one day Messiah will come and will unite all of humanity, even though scientifically there's no evidence that humanity could ever be united, that humanity has ever been united in the past. So, I mean, is that, somewhat you're moralizing, and that, like, you still believe Messiah might come and unite humanity? Or do you have some sort of, like, scientific reason to think that humanity could unite to defeat something like this, even though there would appear to be no evidence of humanity ever uniting?
Well, I'm not making a statement about the likelihood that humanity will unite. I'm making a statement of possibility. It's definitely possible. If people have a given set of preferences and they get convinced about my book, it's very possible for people to get together. Now, is it likely? I'm not affirming this. To the contrary, in my book, I indicate that it's very likely that we will lose against the machine, that eventually some people on Earth will just not agree with us and will decide to go on their own and form this kind of new modified human phenotype. But I don't think it's impossible. So I'm not calling the Messiah, or I'm not making an appeal to something we don't know. We know that the phenotypic revolution principle is true because it happened 4 billion years ago. We know what it will lead to. It will lead human beings to be essentially sterile workers of an ant colony that will be determined by the AI, that will centrally control the genes of everyone, the classes of people that it produces, and the type of human beings that result from it.
But just to break off of you there, aren't we that already, according to your theory, that we're already largely sterile workers, you're working under control of somebody else?
No, we are evolving for ourselves. So the
reason
the
majority of the cells in our body. You just said the majority of the cells in our body are sterile workers.
The cells in our body are, in fact, submitted to the interest of our sperm and eggs, but we still have sperm and eggs. The day we let an AI modify us, then we don't have sperm and eggs anymore. And there's lots of things in the current human phenotype that will then disappear. This includes our ego, our self-survival capacity, our desire to survive, our desire to protect, and our desire to work in our own interest. The day we have evolved under a centrally programmed AI that has evolved for creating highly coordinated teams of humans, the way a queen of an ant colony does, we will be absolutely self-sacrificial to the interest of the hive. we will be willing to kill ourselves for the service to the central cities that control us. And so you might want to think about it twice before committing down this line. You will become a sterile worker of a bigger entity if you do it.
Well, it's interesting, like, okay, even like Orthodox Jews who for a week or something had the propensity to be like, nah, I don't buy it. I don't buy this virus thing. God will protect us. But then after, the community start getting infected, we pushed all the way to the other side, like, shut it down. It's absolutely forbidden to, like, meet or gather with somebody. And you could see that in some sort of setting where, the same people, who would it be? It would be these power structures that, because what they're doing doesn't work, it's just like, okay, we're just going to keep acting like normal until our people start dying. And then when our people start dying, we're going to turn into a totalitarian system. And you could see how quickly the churches, mosques, synagogues, fell in line.
Yes, people are extremely poorly evolved to protect against unexpected and future threats. We have stuff that we've evolved for, like being scared of snakes and stuff like this, but we never quite evolved to handle the scares that are truly facing us right now, and that is a sad thing.
I have a question, JF. I don't know if you're aware of this, but they've attempted to isolate an RNA-based cell colony, and they've failed, even when they set out to try to actually isolate one. So I'm wondering if you could speculate as to why we can't find these RNA-based life forms anymore.
You mean that they tried finding a life form based only in RNA?
Yeah, because as you know, as it stands right now, it's only viral cells that can be RNA-based replicators. Yeah, they actually tried to see if they could create, culture some cell-based life that was RNA-based, and they failed in 100 trials. But they're still optimistic that they can find it. I'm wondering if you can speculate as to why you think they're having trouble finding this RNA-based life form.
Well, interestingly, I do a prediction in my book. I say that such a life form must have existed. There must have been, what I say is a single cell organism once existed, which encoded its genome by alternating between the DNA and RNA forms. This organism may or may not have genetic descendants, but we should be on the lookout. In other words, there must have been a non-DNA self-replicating single cell in the past. That is the conclusion of the theory of phenotypic revolution. Now, we never found it. The reason these lab attempts don't work is that this life form probably adds some survival tricks that are lost in our life forms. If we were to find them in nature, we would see all of the tricks that they have, but we don't. And so as long as we don't find the natural source of it, engineering one will be extremely difficult. Now, we may very well be successful at one point. We may engineer a single cell that maybe even have some reproductive capabilities, but it's going to be hard getting there without knowing what is the big thing that an RNA-based only organism is faced with in terms of challenges. And what I suspect is that there is challenges in terms of size, challenges in terms of replication, in terms of the accuracy of replication, and there is a limited number of genes that you'll be able to hold, because RNA is not like DNA, all formed into chromosomes and big libraries of information. You get much less information in RNA, so it's going to be a tighter game to play.
That's what I like about your revolutionary phenotype theory, because it has the utility of being able to, so to say, think about it from the viruses or the RNA's perspective. Say, okay, with the definition of life that's commonly given, if you just put it as replication and try to give that as like a motive or will to any given species, then that allows you to think about it from their perspective.
Yes, I guess that's your way of seeing it. I see it as replicators. And
well, I said there has to be some spiritual force. I mean, if a person's still in the realm of a believer, so I'm kind of like giving some kind of spiritual, shamanistic understanding to your theory, but I think I largely, and it has utility to the way I think, because it allows me to kind of put myself in the perspective of the virus.
Wonderful. Guys, I have to leave, so I don't know if we're headed toward an end, but maybe I can leave you guys alone with the crowd.
Yeah, I guess we have a smaller crowd probably due to the coronavirus, but I appreciate you coming on and clarifying all these subjects and answering all these questions and talking philosophy and also helping us advance in our streaming careers.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure. I'll do it again. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jeff. See you later. That was pretty good.
Yeah, and he stayed quite a long time. So I think our numbers were smaller, probably due to whatever the YouTube settings are going on right now, and but that's fine. Like basically, I wanted to ask JF those questions on to help my understanding of. I mean, one thing, he's a prominent YouTube streamer personality, grow my own channel, but I mean, honestly, this coronavirus thing made me rethink about his revolutionary phenotype theory.
Yeah, I looked into it a little more. So I wanted to ask him more questions about, like, I guess he's saying that the environmental reasons are why we, like, the previous environmental reasons all that time ago would have made it possible for this RNA-based replicator. And I guess the environment's sufficiently different now that it's no longer possible to observe RNA-based replicators. And I was going to ask, like, why he speculates that the RNA was the first replicant, but I'm guessing it's just because RNA, like, for those of you that don't know, RNA is like half of a DNA molecule. So I don't actually think it's possible, by and large. I don't think self-replicating life can be RNA-based, because I think there's like an actual energetic constraint to where this RNA can even exist. Like it doesn't appear to be possible for it to exist without a context of DNA. And that has to do with a stability thing, right? Like how you said, Doooovid, that the DNA is capable of forming long, stable chains. So it may be a case of, like, life basically has to be, self-replicating life has to be DNA-based because of the same reason that life has to be carbon-based. Because there's like a stability there that's like literally the only state that's stable to code that much information that would be required to host our consciousness.
It's ironic just having you and JF on at the same time that, like, I'll call, like, Quebecois demeanor or strategy, that you and JF in many ways have the same delivery demeanor or even greater strategy.
Oh yeah, I mean, Quebecois culture is awesome. Like I grew up in Quebec, but my family are what they call Anglos, which doesn't mean like the Anglo that we think of today. It's like, it just means English speakers. So my mom's side is all Irish Catholic. So they were all like, they all spoke English at home, right? So I had to learn how to speak French in school, which was pretty rough because, like, they'd always call you tête carré, which means like blockhead, basically, in French if you spoke English. So yeah, it was like, I appreciate that I got to go through this sort of like tougher situation of having to learn a second language, because I think it has made me sort of more cultured at this point. So it's neat that you can notice the similarities. So you're saying, like, literally pace and delivery is recognizably similar?
Well, even kind of like, you're kind of like, my theory explains all of this and, like, proven, like, even that kind of like delivery, like, you're actually probably most similar to JF than anybody else. It's just that JF is probably more popular for general public space media than promotion of his theory. So that JF that comes out when he's defending his revolutionary phenotype is, like, very similar to you when you defend your quantum mind or your my theory that explains that, like, that makes the predictions that it's already solved all of these questions that you're asking.
Yeah, he's better than I am at, like, the word in French is jaser, which means just like I guess it's like kind of small talk. Like he's really good at the monologues. I just feel like at some point it's like I have no idea what to say right now, because for me it's just like this giant crystal of knowledge, and it's hard to know where to start in the description process. So he's pretty successful and engaging. And I wasn't watching his show for a while because I wasn't really enjoying do you remember when I don't know if you've been tuned in for a while, but do you remember when he had a lot of those, like, really weird physics people on, like the Meropes guy?
Yeah, the first one or two episodes. I watched those guys, and then I was like, and then I stopped watching them because like I thought I understood what they were saying, and I didn't. I would have rather watched like MIT explanatory videos or something, or that guy had to make like I did stop watching those. But I don't know. You think that caused you to like boycott his show or just?
Well, I mean, the first time we talked on a stream, it really didn't go well at all. So I was just like put off at that point. And then there was the weird scientist thing happening around the same time. So I was like, I wasn't really enjoying that direction because, like, to me, it's basically like people are asking about me, whether I read books. It's like listening to a physicist talk about physics is about as interesting to me as reading a book because it's just like reading a list of mistakes that someone else has made where it's like, it's just kind of cringy. So I'm glad he's taken the show into a more, I don't know if you want to say a populist direction, but it's kind of neat that he covers the news, but also weaves in science. Even though
he could get the air of being like Dawkins' successor, that Dawkins is more within the system, but I think in this era of streaming and the unpopularity of the system, that Dawkins' successor doesn't have to be like professor or have some tenure or something at some famous institute, and just showing Michigan releases the new coronavirus figures at 2:30, so an hour ago, and God forbid we're at 2,343 deaths. I'll just pop these statistics up as we're doing it. Sorry, I lost track of what I was saying just because I wanted to see the latest coronavirus statistics. But it's he's became kind of an expert on streaming also. So he has his own theory, biology, he has political commentary, he has his network of nationalist political buddies, and maybe his like generic science talk isn't actually as well received. Although I think I say like the coronavirus could provide him and his theory with enough credibility to make him kind of like the established voice or the successor of Richard Dawkins or something. That's what I was kind of thinking of it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like I wasn't around when Dawkins came out. Like maybe he was kind of, relative to whatever the Overton mean was back then. He was like the JF of his day. I just don't know how different things were like in the culture and what beliefs were, mainstream and not. But it does appear like he was kind of pushing against mainstream as far as like his atheism. And I think his position was isn't he who JF says inspired him? The selfish gene was JF.
Yeah, and he even went out to California to meet him, and he was so impressed that he really cared more about ecology than women or something. But I think that he would take that role, in Dawkins famously debated. He was a streamer, he made YouTubes, he spoke to all different types of religious people. Dawkins debated Chief Rabbi of England, Jonathan Sacks. He debated Shmuley Boteach. He debated Deepak Chopra and things like that. There's not too many people on the stage like Dawkins that went around and debated all these people that had their own theories. So it was actually an evolutionary biologist that was advancing the theory of evolution, and did public debates, and became a popular figure, probably one of the most popular figures in the masses for advancing atheistic evolution. And that saying like, who is going to be that figure this next century, and saying, well, in terms of like population, JF's Revolutionary Phenotype or something's not big enough. But in terms of the debate and streaming, that you say it's probably going to be someone like JF because of the debates and the streaming and the media popularity. Even if he can't get himself as like a head of an institute of evolutionary. And maybe if JF has financial success, like he's younger than me, so he would have to have 10 years from now, if he's making large sums of money doing this, that he would actually open up some sort of institute.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
And I don't know if that's something you would do.
Don't you think atheism is kind of mainstream now? So like part of Dawkins' cachet was that he was like an atheist when most people were religious, but now the like countercultural cachet would come from a theist, wouldn't it? Like just to get the same sort of level of cultural resonance.
Well, that was my point of saying I prefer JF's view to Stefan because I think at least it's logically consistent. And where you say, although people are culturally Christian and go to church or something like that, actually JF's position is more indicative. I mean, even though, obviously he doesn't have like, followers or institutes or churches or rituals, but his philosophy is more indicative of mainstream or dominant strategy today. I mean, besides maybe his libertarianism and his various other things, but I just mean the moral nihilism has actually become the dominant strategy.
Like, are you equating that to moral relativism? Because I feel like there's a huge amount of moral pearl clutching in the modern zeitgeist.
Well, that's why I'm putting that proto-Noahidism. So like Stefan Molyneux is a proto-Noahide where, he's just missing the more religious ones or the dietary one. But like in essence, Molyneux arguing for the Noahide position, not although he's claiming to be a scientist and an evolutionist and various things, that like in essence he's a Noahide.
I think his view is more of coming from a reciprocity direction. But the more I think about your idea, there is some truth. I think there is truth to your idea. It's an interesting theory. I'm actually really glad you thought of it because I don't think I would have thought I would.
The multiple truth hypothesis. I forgot to ask JF about that, and because he seemed like he was leaning towards what I'm calling the multiple truth hypothesis.
No, I would describe him as a material determinist.
No, I meant in terms of how he was describing truth, where truth is a probability wave, a probability curve. So I think JF is basically asserted that that's his position.
No, he didn't say truth was a probability curve. What he said was that he was using quantum mechanics as an example for when something and its opposite can both be true technically. And he was giving quantum mechanics as an example of that. As a means of disproving that Molyneux' position that it is possible to define universally preferred behavior.
So ironically, JF's opinion on that, or publicly voicing that, as far as what I know, is the closest thing to Doooovidism, multiple truth hypothesis that anyone else has publicly said or endorsed.
Well, I think JF is probably closer to will to power in terms of an overall life philosophy.
Or will to replicate.
Well, there you go. There's your connection. The replication, the main manifestation of the will to power is the will to replicate, because we wouldn't be here if we didn't have at least a 51% majority shareholder in the replication department, because the environment would select against that, right? So I think will to power has accepted the quantum mind hypothesis and JF hasn't. But functionally what that reduces to is like, they're both theories, right? So what's a theory? It's a way to compress information so that things make more sense to you. So the way that I compress information is there's this centralized conscious entity that organizes the biological entity, right? And JF sees it as something different. But if those two theories make the same predictions, they hold the same information content, there may actually be no effective difference in the manifestation of those beliefs, though I do think there's like a spiritual sort of manifestation from people's beliefs. But just from a pure science perspective, I'd say JF is closest to will to power out of anyone that we've seen. But then for you, your position is basically like you're pro-Noahide laws, right?
Well, I think you have to separate the multiple truth hypothesis as a scientific theory from being pro-Noahide in terms, I mean, it is related, but I mean, saying, I'm pro-Noahide because I'm pro-Jewish and I'm pro monotheism, and for the God that I worship to be the God of everyone has to either imply, Noahidism or something like the multiple truth hypothesis, because I want to believe that the God that I worship as a Jew is in fact the God of the whole cosmos. So if you
why does that have to involve the multiple truth hypothesis? Isn't that a singular truth?
Well, it's saying to avoid the dissonance, because obviously, because it's very well. The dissonance is someone who that your private God, your cultural God, your clique of people's method of culture. To claim that that's representative of the one true God who created the whole universe is a pretty difficult thing to do. So the dissonance of saying,
well, the periodic table.
Well,
Obviously, my way of acquiring knowledge is most in line with the universe itself because of the periodic table. It's very easy for me to believe that.
we should have a separate stream on that. And also, because I'm using StreamYards, I'm gonna hit my 20-hour. I got a 20-hour limit per month, so it's likely I'm gonna stream Saturday night again on the coronavirus because it appears it's going to keep on getting worse before it gets better. And
I can always host it from my OBS if you want. Doooovid's a little squeamish to give me his stream key, but don't worry, I've guarded several other stream keys. You can trust me.
I wasn't squeamish to give you the stream key. I just thought that the screen share or my bandwidth might be better. It wasn't the stream key, but I thought the issue was because I'm the screen shares or your bandwidth, because I think that I have enough bandwidth to get 720 and sometimes 1080, and you only have enough bandwidth to get like 480 or something like that.
Oh, okay. I can get a display on the whole screen for the website. It looks okay to me, but yeah, it's up to you.
But I say if you go to your channel, just to show what I mean, I'll do the screen share now, and it wasn't a distrust of Jennifer. That was my thinking, but so here is this stream right now, and you can see quality 720, and sometimes I even get 1080. I'm not sure. I used to get 1080, and now I've only been getting 780. But so here is week in review on Church of Entropy, and when you go to that, you can only get up to 480. So especially when I'm showing mostly screen share and slides, that means the video quality is almost 50% better on my channel than your channel.
Maybe I can play with the settings and get something faster.
I think that's that's your bandwidth, and it's saying, okay, I pay like $80 a month here for high-speed internet, or the best available in my area. And JF now has he has some sort of direct wire into his house. He probably JF's internet speed is probably 1,000 times faster than mine, and mine is maybe only twice as fast as yours or whatever, and that depends on your area or your finances to do. But that was the large reason, especially when I'm doing presentations, if it and also if I think about put the link in the chat, that StreamYards provides a very easy method of controlling giving the link out. But either way, that's I'll give you a chance to say some final words and talk straight to the audience or anyone who was listening. And we're down to 11 viewers anyways, because I guess we're getting shadow banned or whatever from the COVID. So people who are going to watch this later, that this will largely be topical. So I'll give you final words, and likely I'll stream Saturday night, and I'll invite Jennifer if she's around for the further update, and then I'll try to give more information about the coronavirus. I'll find some more slides on the latest medical information, and and this week I want to go more into specifically the biochemistry, and maybe we'll get down to Jennifer's expertise, and we'll actually get to the periodic table and look at some biochemistry and thermodynamics. And last week we didn't discuss things like the physics of the spread and droplets, and that would largely be pure physics. So hopefully Jennifer will have time, and I'll be able to do some research to find some nice graphics on that for Saturday in the week in review, or maybe we'll talk philosophy or whatever if there's demand or interest, and then we'll talk more general philosophy and streaming other things in the week in review.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Doooovid, and great job getting JF on the show. I had a really good time. It was nice to finally talk to him under circumstances that weren't so heated. So really enjoyed that, and looking forward to the Saturday stream as well as week in review. And people can check out schoolofentropy.wordpress.com if they want to check out the slides that go into quantum evolution and photonics. They'll give you an idea of how we approach life and how we conceptualize of things like viruses and so forth.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to Jennifer for joining me. Thanks to JF for accepting my invite. And hopefully we're going to beat this virus, and said to beat the virus, so to say, think like the virus, and that means we got to study it, we got to see how it works, and in terms of like the scientists that might develop a vaccine or solve it permanently, versus just the advice for people under quarantine or basic health advice. So I'm going to keep on doing research on that, and so stay safe and have a great day.
Thanks, Doooovid.